Grain Elevator and Processing Society is hosting their annual Jeeps Exchange Conference at the Kansas City Convention Center February 22nd through the 25th of 2025. Jeeps Exchange is the biggest and best show in the grain industry with more than 400 exhibitors and 45 hours of education. It is the best place to find grain handling and processing operation solutions all in one place. Jeeps Exchange brings together industry professionals from across the world to help build professional networks and connect with the products you need. Come walk the trade show floor, take part in live demonstrations, innovation stations, and see new equipment. Make valuable connections through a variety of fun and exciting social events. Early bird pricing ends January 28th. Learn more and register at jeeps.com/exchange. In this episode of Whole Grain, we'll provide our second exclusive on-the-ground report from Sao Paulo, Brazil, home of the recent Latin American event in which Jeeps partnered with Victam International. We're talking grain quality in tropical environments, all that and more coming up next. Hey folks, welcome grain professionals to this episode of Whole Grain. My name is Jim Lenz, your host of the Whole Grain Show and the Director of Global Training and Education at Jeeps, where the mission of the Grain Elevator and Processing Society is to champion, connect, and serve the global grain industry and our members. At Jeeps, we work to be the global community and thought leader for the grain industry, which feeds and fuels the world. Our guest for today is Carlos Campopadel. Carlos is a faculty member of the Department of Grain Science and Industry at Kansas State University. He works at the International Grains Program Institute, or IGP, as an extension specialist focused on outreach in the areas of grain storage, quality and processing, U.S. grain grading and export systems, and feed manufacturing. Victam International hosted its first ever event in South America. The event took place October 3rd through the 5th of 2023 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Austin Carpenter, Deb Most, our Jeeps member and chapters manager, and I headed south to Victam, Latin America. In addition to the expansive trade show floor, Jeeps offered 2 days of educational sessions. Carlos played a role in the Jeeps educational offerings at the South American event. His session on maintaining grain quality in tropical environments generated some good discussion. Here's my interview with Carlos on the trade show floor. All right, we're with Carlos Campopadel, outreach specialist in the grain storage and feed manufacturing at the IGB Institute, or also known as the International Grains Program at the University of Kansas State. He's also faculty member at the Department of the Grain Science and Industry. Now, Carlos, we are recording this episode at the very first ever Victam LatAm in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We are actually right in the trade show floor, so if it sounds kind of busy and there's some abstract noises and sounds back there, hey, this is what it's like over here at the convention. We thank you for serving as a speaker in the educational session here and representing your profession and your specialty. And thanks for being a member of Jeeps and a longtime friend of Jeeps and part of the Jeeps family. But if you could first talk about this event, can you provide some context? We're in day 2 of day 3. What are your things you can share maybe with our listeners what this is all about?
Sure. First of all, Jim, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this podcast, and also, again, thanking on your behalf, Jeeps, for the invitation to be a speaker to this event. So, for me, it is the first time of participating in Victam, Latin America. I have previously attended Victam a couple of times in Asia and Thailand. So, for me, this is a very good experience and overall, because you get to see a very good combination of participants. I mean, the majority of course are here from Brazil, but being Sao Paulo this big, kind of like hub for Latin America, we also got people from Colombia, Peru, and even all the way to Mexico. So, kind of same distance far away as the U.S. And it's very interesting to see this event having all the different equipment manufacturers from all the way from the feed side, feed manufacturing, and of course grain handling, grain storage, and then all the different other areas that are related to grain, like laboratory equipment, of course fire protection, all the different things to make that industry better. So it is a great opportunity to be here, meet new people, and also see a lot of familiar faces from the U.S. and also here from South America.
Wonderful. A great overview. Thank you so much. There are educational sessions here, and for those on the track of quality processing, storage, and equipment for grain, you delivered a session on maintaining grain quality in tropical environment. It was a great session. It was very well attended, and we'll talk about the Q&A because there were a number of questions out there, and so that shows interest, it shows care. It's a good indicator that people are looking to help each other out, and you're a great resource. So first of all, can you give us some highlights of what your session was about?
Well, at first I'd like to add that it's great that Jeeps is partnering with Victam, because part of what Jeeps provides to its members and non-members too is educational material. So having this session fits very well, and I had the opportunity to kind of talk a lot of the things that I do. I have worked in grain storage for a number of years, and coming from a tropical country myself, Costa Rica, it applies very well. So I did focus on a couple things that I usually do when I talk about this area, this topic is, first of all, to make people kind of remind them and understand the different factors that affect grain, being corn, soybeans, wheat, anything, when you store in the tropics, which is a little bit different to what we do in the U.S. that is more temperate weather and what they do in Europe. And because a lot of the technical material and education is more focused in those areas. So I always like to say, hey, some things are similar, but there's a lot of different things that we have to focus because of the weather conditions, high temperature, high relative humidity. So I cover a little bit about that, and then I went through the different steps of how I like to explain it and how to mitigate those factors, about applying different practices that can help you mitigate any potential losses of quality based on what you receive. And when I do that, I always like to call it like steps, and one of them is always kind of like tell people, you know what, it's important to do those practices, but you need to have a very strong quality assurance and control program. Focus on having a good sampling techniques, and so you know to measure and understand what you're getting. And based on that, make decisions of what practices you're going to be applied, how much investment or let's say resources you're going to be used to help maintain that quality. So after that, I focus on different storage practices. One of them, of course, aeration. That is a big thing that we do to cool down grain, to control insects, to reduce mold growth. But here in the tropics, a little bit of a challenge, so I had to explain some of those things too. Then, of course, introduce to complement these practices and make a difference of an edge of my presentation. I complemented using technology. I mean, some of the different technologies some are very new, some are not that new, but probably not that well known or apply in the region to help complement that. For example, if you're a storage and then a processing person, how you could use NRI technology to know what is the quality throughout the process. Automatic sampling systems, for example, using sensors to measure carbon dioxide levels to help complement temperature cables to understand if there's a loss of quality because of mold growth or insect infestations. And then, of course, different other sensors. For example, how can you know what is your real-time inventory by using infrared technology and different things that could help you be more efficient in a way that, applying technology costs more money at the beginning, but then at the end of the long term or medium long terms, you will actually save some money because you made your operation more efficient and then, of course, safer in a way.
Very nice. Yeah. It was so well received. You were up there for an extended period of time because there are great questions that people ask. And if it's okay with you, would you be able to share some of those inquiries that people had following your session?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at some point, I felt a little bit that I was going to take the next speaker's time, but the session was well planned to give 15 minutes in between presentation, plus I gave 50 minutes overall of my time to answer them, and we were, I guess, we're fortunate to have good audience and people interested and the questions, and I think I'll make this remark that I gave my presentation in Spanish, and being my native language and closer to Portuguese, beside that fact that we had simultaneous translation, but I was always doubtful that people were going to pick up all the terms and ask the right questions, but they did. So half the audience understood Spanish directly, and the other half had simultaneous translation. And some of the questions that came up, I guess I will divide them in three main areas. I mean, the first one, of course, like every time you talk about storage, there's always that questions on narration. And there were people, asking, well, why you want to put more air in your grain, and if you're going to cause more issues eventually if you have mold growth. And I said, well, because we're trying to cool down the grain to kind of like buy you time you could do something to move that grain or keep it for a longer term in terms of storage, but also introduce a technology of grain chilling, where you actually cool down the air, not just using ambient air, to keep the grain even longer at cooler temperature. The cooler the grain, the less comfortable those insects will be there to reproduce and eat. And also, of course, mold will not grow as fast, which is always a factor that can cause spoilage. And, of course, at some point, even if the conditions are right, produce aflatoxins or aquatoxins that are mycotoxins that can be produced during storage, besides that in the field. So we focused that a little bit, but then on the following questions, one that I was actually very happy to see, there were questions focusing on grain dust explosions, because there's always that confusion that if you array the grain, you could cause that. And then, of course, even we had some people in the audience helping with those discussions, because it's a topic that is always, people feel very passionate because you're actually helping people be safe. So we have those questions on grain dust explosions. Mainly was how can they be created, what can cause them, and then we focus on those 5 components that are needed to have those. So we went a little bit in depth in terms of those, and of course, being at tropical weather locations, there's always that, and I'm going to call it maybe wrongly, but it's like a myth that people think like, well, they probably cannot occur only in dry places like, the United States or Canada or Europe, but like I explained there to the audience, they do happen in tropical weather locations, and I've seen them in Central America, Southeast Asia. So we did some examples of why they occur. Even one gentleman from the audience that I actually know from Colombia explained that they have also happened in Colombia. So that's something that we focus. And then, of course, also thinking about the difference in terms of grain dust explosions at the farm level, where the dust has a little bit more minerals and things like that is a little bit less likely that will happen, but focus more on handlers, storage, and processing facilities where the dust is a lot more combustible. So that's always very important to focus on that. And then probably the topic that I think I touched briefly, but there were a lot of questions, was fumigation. And in fumigation, being very few options on what to use to fumigate, I introduced the topic of recirculating phosphate. And some people had the doubt about how can you seal a grain bin in a safe way and use recirculation, because you could have some leakage. And we all know that if you have leakage of your gas, you're not gonna be able to reach the concentration that you need to do a efficient fumigation, and also the risk of leakage that can cause, of course, some hazard to humans or animals that are nearby. So we addressed that on how to seal the grain bins and then what to do in a way, to have a more efficient recirculation and overall fumigation. And then another topic that I was actually a little bit surprised, fellows that I know from Mexico, being a big importer of U.S. grain and also grain producing country, they were talking about how can you fumigate outer grain piles. And I went a little bit in detail about it, that how can you do depending on your setup. Your outer grain pile being a bunker, or having the tar being whole bioaeration systems. And at Kansas State, we've had the opportunity to do some research into it on the modeling side. So I share some of our experience of that. And then, of course, also explain what we do in the U.S., because in the U.S., of course, depending where you're located, some grains are more likely to be put on piles than others. And they ask me why, and of course it's because of a value, also time of harvest, and how do you move the grain, and of course if you have the conditions for it. So that was something that we focused. So the questions were, in a way, all of them, I would say, a little bit in the science, a little bit on the technical aspects of things that are complemented by research, and I will say also personal experience. Some of the things that we see, being fortunate enough to have traveled throughout the region doing this type of technical expertise on presentations and advising.
We thank you for sharing that information. Those were some questions that they addressed in there. I think there was one more on the grain technologies to support them in this high humid climate.
Some people might call it new technology, some people might not, but of course there's always a topic of modified atmospheres. What can you do? And one question that came is, how about the use of inert gas? And I went through it and kind of like share. I didn't have it on my presentation, but I share some of our experience at Kansas State University for the last 15 years that we have done research using carbon dioxide to do a modified atmosphere in a storage structure, and then of course the use of nitrogen. And I explained how that nitrogen can take over the oxygen in a seal structure to control the growth of insects and mold, and why are some benefits of using it and some disadvantages, of course, because they both have them, and some of the challenges of using this type of technology. So those type of technologies are used widely in other crops, agricultural crops, especially in the fruit and vegetables and other things because of the value of those crops. But research has been done on the grains, and at some point it can also be used. So some of those things were related, and even afterwards we had some great conversations after the Q&A sessions with some of the participants that we met throughout the different hallways of the educational sessions, and of course here at the expo, because part of the message, and I'm adding here a little bit, but I think it's important that my role as presenter, but also as Jim mentioned, as a JIPS member, I have participated in several committees in the past. We like to grow the association and how it is expanding to international markets, and so we've been here helping some of the people that we know, some people that we just met, on explaining JIPS, and some of them already know, but how can they benefit of joining as a member or coming back to Kansas City for future JIPS exchange and taking advantage of all the educational material, because presenting here is kind of like how I say it, hey, it's the infomercial of coming over and participating in the JIPS sessions that we have during the exchange, or all the rest of education material that JIPS offer with Kansas State and other universities and on their own that could be beneficial from all the different areas, from management, human resources, and of course all the different grain handling equipment, and of course different grains that we have partners. So I think that's part of the benefit of it, being like an alcoholic, and I'm talking too much about myself, but I think I feel like hey, I'm an ambassador to help JIPS, grow our industry, and of course grow our academic programs at Kansas State University.
We're certainly lucky to have you as a good JIPS friend and presenting here today. What's really neat is that you're helping make the grain industry smaller, meaning more connected. And we can help each other by folks like you devoting time, effort, and energy to do that. So we thank you very much, and thanks for this podcast.
No, thank you for the opportunity, and also again for the invitation to be here.
All right, thank you. We thank you, our listeners, for making Whole Grain part of your day. Whole Grain is a production of JIPS, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society. The Grain Elevator and Processing Society is the largest organization dedicated to advancing the grain handling and processing industry. Be sure to check out jeeps.com, GEAPS.com. Make it a great day, and thanks for listening to Whole Grain.